Hi, I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. With us, a reporter, international reporter from the New American Magazine. His name is Alex Newman. He's become a favorite. People here just love him. It's just, wow, a young guy with, lots of brains. There's hope for the human race with somebody this young who thinks the way he does. Alex Newman, thanks for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Thank you so much for having me, Greg. It's always a pleasure.
I also want to plug this, too, because this is something you've had since your college days. You've had your own website for a long time, but recently you have started to, post content on it. And I want people to know this is free. This is libertysentinel.org, libertysentinel.org. It's your little daily notebook blog, which the folks at the New American Magazine allow you to do, which is fantastic. You also produce a lot of content for the New American Magazine. Most recently, you talked about the treason with the this whole Trump debacle. Let's just cut to the chase. And I'm going to start with the ending of your article. And you said that time to strike is now. That was your end of your article, because we can stop trying to prove this. I mean, they tried to take him down in a made-up, phony story that started with a intelligence operation that turned into a phony Mueller witch hunt, which he was not legitimately sat because there wasn't any crime. They did all these awful things. They made it up. I mean, of course, the major piece of evidence came from Hillary Clinton and the DNC. But I digress. We don't have to prove what went on. It was treason. Why did you end your article with the time to strike is now?
Because what you said is exactly right, Greg. The time to prove this is finished. Everybody knows now that this was a giant hoax. And if this had happened in any other country, I mean, imagine a coup against Angela Merkel, where senior officials in the government conspired after the election to make up stuff and overthrow her government. Imagine this against Theresa May. Imagine this against Emmanuel Macron. Imagine this against the president of Mexico, AMLO. In any one of those countries, all the coup plotters, all the traitors would have been rounded up, arrested, and put on trial. So everybody in America now, even the people who watch the fake news, now realizes that this was, not just a hoax, because a hoax implies, something funny, something, playful. This was a plot. This was a conspiracy to overthrow the democratically elected president of the United States, to overthrow our constitutional system of government using criminal means to wage war on the United States. In any other country, civilized or uncivilized, the coup plotters would have been arrested and put on trial. And, there's nothing to discuss anymore. We know they did it. It's time for them to be arrested. It's time for them to be put on trial. I'm very pleased that Trump is using the word treason. I'm very pleased that his spokesperson, Huckabee, is using the word treason. That's the word that needs to be used. And, the time to strike is now. The debate is over. They've had 2 years to find evidence. There's none. We all know this. Even the Trump haters know this. So it's time to strike.
The mainstream press was part of this deal. I mean, period, the end. Wittingly or unwilling. I mean, I think some of them were in on the leak strategy. That Lisa Page and I brought this up many times, and Peter Strzok, who she was the lawyer for McCabe, the number 2 at the FBI. Strzok was the number 2 counterintelligence agent at the FBI. This is high-ranking people. They're talking about the media leak strategy. They were involved in it, and I think it's funny. Sarah Sanders comes up and says, this is treason, punishable by death. It also came up with Dianne Feinstein asking about a judicial nominee about military court, and he was like, "No, this is coming in front of my court." I think his name is Collins. We shouldn't do it. Trump used the treason, but we didn't get very much. There wasn't very much media coverage of them talking about putting somebody to death and treason and military tribunals. What do you make of that with the mainstream press?
It is very interesting, Greg, and I think it tells us a lot. Anytime Sarah Sanders says anything that the media thinks is controversial, that's silly, that makes them look ridiculous, they just play it on endless loop. Look at this dummy White House spokesperson, can't even keep her thoughts together, and yet we hear almost nothing about these comments. Treason is punishable by death. As I was writing this article about Trump using the word treasonous, he said treasonous things have been done, evil things have been done against our country. Anytime Trump says something that the media doesn't like, that they think is ridiculous, it's in the headlines. They're trying to make him look like a fool, and yet there was very, very little written about this. And I think the reason is because there has been real collusion. And when I talk about collusion, I mean between the media elites and the Obama and the Hillary elites. And I think that's where this investigation needs to go. We need to find out who was involved in this conspiracy, who was consciously involved in these criminal, treasonous activities. And this all needs to come out, and these people need to be punished. And they'll say, well, this is persecution against the media. No, it's not, right? The media has a constitutionally guaranteed right to report freely, to tell the truth, even to make stuff up if they want. What they don't have a right to do is collude in criminal activities with criminal officials trying to overthrow the democratically elected government of the United States. That crosses the line. That's not journalism anymore. That is conspiracy. There's a criminal charge, conspiracy. And when you're conspiring against your own country, which of course David Rockefeller admitted he was doing in his memoirs, right? Then there's a name for that. It's called treason. And so I think it's time for Trump and the Trump administration and the American people to demand some accountability here.
You wrote a book, Deep State Pulling the Strings from Behind the Scenes. This was back in 2018. And I got to tell you, I had Dave Janda on, and he says, listen, people like Obama and Hillary, and he named a bunch of people, Paul Ryan, who's now on the board of Fox after they rigged the election and called it an hour and a half early on the West Coast Fox News, the paragon of virtue. And conservatism called the race an hour and a half early, which they never really took a big hit for. And the guy that helped him, Paul Ryan, who had 30 some odd seats, GOP seats open for the election with nobody running 90 days before the election. Yeah, you were really working to get that, hang on to the House, weren't you? But anyway, I digress. This is much deeper, much bigger than, because you've written about Deep State, you've written books about it, you've gone to Bilderberg, you've done a lot of stuff overseas as a foreign and international correspondent for the New American. This is much bigger and deeper than Obama and Clinton and all the other players that you know of. Is it not? And if it is, tell us what it really is.
It really is, Greg, and I think that's so important for people to understand. I think Trump has a pretty good understanding of this too. The reality is, a lot of the talk of the deep state that we hear on, for example, Fox News even, they're talking about rogue bureaucrats. They're talking about FBI officials and officials at the intelligence agencies, maybe even John Brennan, potentially even Obama and Hillary. But the reality is the deep state goes so much deeper than that. Behind the scenes, there is this vast network of secret organizations and secretive organizations, semi-secret organizations, I call them, where all of these deep staters that we see interlock and network with deep staters that we don't see. Probably the premier example of this is the Council on Foreign Relations, the premier U.S. example. This has always been a branch of an international movement set up by Cecil Rhodes with his roundtable groups. And the goal has always been, as they admit themselves, as their publications admit, as whistleblowers have explained, the goal has always been to subvert U.S. sovereignty and merge us into a global regime, if you will, that these people often call a new world order. Then you have, of course, the Bilderberg group, a semi-secret organization, 120 to 150 of the top, world leaders and their useful idiots coming together, or Western leaders, I should say. And recently they've started inviting Russians and communist Chinese and so on. And then you have real secret societies, right? And this, you never hear this talked about in the mainstream press, but you have the Skull and Bones Society at Yale University, for example, that was described by one of America's premier historians, Anthony Sutton, as America's secret establishment. He described this as a recruiting ground for a conspiracy to create a world government. And the way they operate, as he explains in this book, actually he got the information from my good friend Charlotte Iserbyt, who is a senior advisor on education to Reagan, says the way they operate is they try to control both sides of the debate. So we saw this clearly in the 2004 election. John Kerry, the Democratic candidate, was a member of Skull and Bones. George W. Bush, the Republican candidate, was a member of Skull and Bones. And they talked about this on TV. So two members from the same secret society running for president on both major tickets. And then you have the Bohemian Grove. And this is, I think, so interesting, Greg, as it relates to Trump. You have this weirdo group in Northern California. It's called the Bohemian Grove. It's been around for over 100 years. They get together in the redwood forests of California, and they engage in, occult rituals, and they have this cremation of care where they all wear hoods and stand in front of this 40-foot stone owl and burn what they claim is a human effigy. If you read your Bible, you know very clearly what's going on here, right? It's not worship of God, we can say that. And Trump is the first Republican president since the 1920s who did not go to Bohemian Grove. Richard Nixon described it as one of his most important speeches, the speech he gave at Bohemian Grove, which nobody talked about, off record, right? 2,500 of the most powerful men in the world, nobody talked about it. So these are the kinds of networks, I think, that really need to be looked at. We need to shine the light on these things. These people love to hide in darkness because they're doing evil. If they were doing good, they wouldn't have to hide in the shadows. So that's what I really hope will come out of all this, Greg, is that as we go after the deep state, we don't just let a couple of these low-level fall guys, John Brennan and a couple of these guys fall on their sword and say, oh, that's the end of the conspiracy. Everybody's in jail now, everyone's been punished. We need to really look at what's going on behind the scenes, too.
That's a great point. They have to operate in the shadows because they're doing evil. They don't want people to know what they're really doing. That's what I always like about the Democrats. They always want to call something what it is. The Democrats, 2020 presidential candidates, at a rally. I mean, the cuckoo just keeps cuckooing out. I mean, crazy. 44 senators vote to kill babies outside the womb. If I told you that 6 months ago, you'd go, get out. You're not going to get 44 Democratic senators. Joe Manchin, to his credit, didn't do it. Joe, if you're listening to this, just slip over to the Republican side. You're done being a Democrat. You're from a coal state. You voted not to kill babies. You voted for Kavanaugh. You voted against the Green New Deal. Joe, stop. Please run, Joe, run. But I digress. I want to go back to the crazy stuff they're doing now. I mean, I brought this up in my weekly news wrap-up a couple of times, that Project Veritas has been neutered. There's nothing that they can reveal. They're out. They're chanting. This is the latest. Chanting a phrase from a cop killer who killed a New Jersey highway patrolman and then escaped to Cuba. And this is the presidential candidates for the Democratic Party are at a rally chanting this. Do you know about this? I mean, does the crazy ever get any crazier than this?
Well, what's happened, Greg, is the crazy is now coming out of the closet. That's why they want the open borders. They know they've lost the American people, but they are now coming out of the closet with this kookiness, with the kill babies, with the praising a communist cop killer, right? Assata Shakur. This has kind of been like a hidden, concealed subculture. We knew that this was going on in the Democratic Party. We knew that the elites held these crazy views, but the public at large didn't. But now they're coming out of the closet. They're revealing their true colors. A couple years ago, they wanted to take God out of the party platform. This is the direction that the Democrat Party is going. They're trying to take the Republican Party with them, the rhino element within the Republican Party, to leave us without any options. Fortunately, a lot of at least the grassroots Republicans have seen through this and have resisted it. But the Democrat Party is now officially the party of baby killing, the party of globalism, the party of conspiracy and treason against the government of the United States, the party of let's abolish the Electoral College so that we can win through vote fraud in New York and California. So, they have now become a threat to the survival of our republic as a free republic, and they've become a threat to the survival of our Constitution and our liberties. I'm hoping that the American people will see this, but the problem is, Greg, they have 85% of our kids in their classrooms, and the entire education system is controlled by people who believe like they do. So that's the real threat. Older Americans recognize that this is absolutely bonkers, but they got the younger generations in the classroom being indoctrinated, and that's, I think, where the real threat is from this crazy ideology that they're pushing.
There is some hope. I heard at the latest Trump rally up in Michigan last week or so that 35%. This was stunning to me. I did not verify this, but one of the facts I heard was 35% were Democrats. The Democrats have to be looking at this platform of open borders and we're going to kill babies. Which, if you're at least bit aged, you're thinking you're going to kill a baby outside a womb and you're going to take care of my health care.
All right.
But they had 35% Democrats up in. Do you think there's a bunch of Democrats that are freaking out that aren't going to show up in a poll, that we're going to go to the polls and say I'm done? I can't imagine they're going to keep their base, are they?
No, I don't think so. And I think one of the things that the Democrats have relied on is that a lot of older Americans don't realize what happened to the party, right? Maybe they don't sit watching the news all day. Maybe they get their news from fake news sources. And so you have a lot of older Americans who grew up in a earlier generation that still think of the Democrats as somewhat reasonable. You've had a lot of good Democrats in history. I mean, Larry McDonald, Congressman Larry McDonald from Georgia, was a hero, until the Soviets murdered him. But now,
John
as the
Kennedy.
party Exactly. I mean, talking about the global conspiracy to enslave every man, woman, and child on the planet. I mean, this guy knew that there were dark forces, and he tried to hold them back. Unfortunately, the Democrat Party has now completely left that. And as these older Americans in places like West Virginia, in places like South Carolina and Georgia, as they realize what has happened to their party, they are abandoning it. Same thing in Michigan. Even union workers and manufacturing workers in the Midwest who used to vote Democrat, they're realizing that their party has been hijacked by lunatics and evil people. And so I think this is going to be a big problem for the Democrat Party going forward. That's why they're demanding open borders. I mean, they're counting on new voters, so-called, right, really illegal immigrants and immigrants who aren't allowed to vote. They're counting on massive vote fraud in California, in New York, in Illinois, places where they control the justice system, where they know their people aren't going to be prosecuted, to be able to continue to win elections. And that is exactly why they depend on open borders and brainwashing of children. Without those two things, the Democrat Party would be deader than the dodo bird.
Oh, that's very good. That's very good. Why do you think they have come out so hard? Why they've always been like this? I said this. Listen, they've always been like this. They just have revealed themselves. Why do you think now? Why is it AOC or Ilhan Omar or Tlaib or whatever her name is up there in I think Michigan? Is these new blood candidates and they're trying to outdo each other? Why now? Why the big reveal lefty swing, Marxist swing now? What do you think that is?
Well, I think what's happening, Greg, is that they realize that Americans are waking up by the millions, and not just Americans. This is happening around the world. As I travel all over the place and talk to people, people everywhere are waking up to the fake media. People everywhere are waking up to the plans of the globalist elites to flood their countries with immigrants, are waking up to the surrender of sovereignty, to the global warming scam, or hoax, as our president calls it. And if people wake up quickly enough, the entire power structure that they built is at risk. So I think what's happening now is the equivalent of running naked through the streets right before it's win or lose right now. That's the situation they're in. If they don't succeed this time around, I think they realize too many people are going to wake up. They're going to be in major trouble, and so they're just going for it all the way right now, full stop. And it really is a fight to the finish. And I think they're hoping that with voter fraud, illegal immigration, and the brainwashing of the kids, they can still pull this off. Whether they can or not remains to be seen. But the reality is people are waking up everywhere in huge numbers, and they can't contain it anymore, even with censorship of the internet, even with rigging their algorithms. People are hungry for the truth. People know they've been lied to. Imagine how Rachel Maddow's viewers must feel, right? 2 years of this, Trump collusion, Russia collusion, and then, oh my goodness, all our hopes were pinned on absolutely nothing. Just imagine how that would feel. They recognize that they're in a very precarious situation. They know that the radical element of their base is the most active. They know a lot of the elites agree with this, people like George Soros, and so they're going for it, and it's do or die for them.
I was watching the Christian movie Unplanned, and I just can't hit this enough. And they brought up George Soros. They brought up Bill Gates. They brought up that we're a $1 billion corporation, and this is one of the quote unquote villains in the movie who is a big a Planned Abortion Hood person. I like to call it what it is. It's not Planned Parenthood. It's a Planned Abortion Hood. It's the industry, the abortion industry. And she was talking about how we're a $1 billion corporation. We have people like George Soros and Bill Gates backing us, and somebody else I can't remember with. But they came out in the movie and named it. And there's no wonder why the Twitter account went down, and no wonder why they tried to thwart this, because it was a good movie.
It was an amazing.
Did you see
unbelievable.
it?
I saw. I missed the premiere. I was at a meeting, an off-record meeting a couple of weeks ago. But I saw the preview, and I like to think of myself as tough. And I actually cried during the preview. It was so powerful. It was so moving. They have to do everything possible to stop this movie.
Oh, they have to. Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is part of their whole deal, because without killing the citizens we have here by the millions, I mean, I think it's 6,000 a day, 6,000 a week Planned Parenthood does 360,000 abortions a year, so it works out to about 7,000 a day, somewhere in that neighborhood. Thousands a week. And this is a movie. So you're seeing more pushback even in Hollywood. It did number 5 at the box office. It made all its money back the first weekend. I mean, is this what you're talking about? The awakening. This is part of that.
Absolutely. If you look at the polling data, Greg, what you see is that Americans are becoming more pro-life. Americans don't want babies murdered. Even pro-abortion people don't want babies murdered right before they're about to come out of their mother's womb, or, heaven forbid, a post-birth abortion, as these New York and Virginia Democrats are talking about. This is an issue that even liberals, when they see a baby on these 3D sonogram machines, they have feelings too. They see that and they say, "Oh my goodness!" But on the other side, they're coming at it, to go back to this theme of coming out of the closet. In Texas, I don't know if you saw the video, there was a protest down there at the legislature, at the Capitol, and you had the pro-Planned Parenthood, pro-abortion people literally chanting, "Hail Satan." Talk about coming out of the closet. Hail Satan, hail. Probably a lot of them just thought, hey, we're just going to, make fun of the Christians by chanting Hail Satan. But there really is a spiritual element to this battle, and I think it's becoming more and more clear to people who are paying attention.
Wow, that's unbelievable. And then they had the Senate vote, which failed, which they did get a majority. Manchin voted for this too, about not killing a baby outside the womb. But 44 Democratic senators said, "Oh yeah, no, we want to kill babies outside the womb."
Yeah, and how extreme is that? How crazy is that? And if you look at these organizations too, Greg, I was at a meeting a couple weeks ago and I talked to Reggie Littlejohn, who's done a lot of work in China. She explained how Planned Parenthood and the United Nations were working with the Communist Chinese government to enforce their forced abortions, their population control regime. She said what's happened now in New York, it's more atrocious than what the Communist Chinese are doing. And yet you have Planned Parenthood, United Nations, communist dictators, all of them coalescing around this, hey, let's murder babies. And yet New York Democrats have gone even more extreme than that. That ought to tell you something about where these people are.
How does Cuomo plan on running on that? How do these Democrat senators plan on running on, I think babies should die outside the womb? How do they think they're going to win on that?
It's going to be a tough one because, again, even pro-choice Democrats don't believe in this stuff. I just got a poll in my inbox yesterday that said the overwhelming majority of pro-choice Democrats don't agree with murdering babies in the 3rd trimester, much less as they're coming out of their mothers. So this is going to be tough for them, really. I think without the voter fraud and without the indoctrination, they would be toast. And so I think those are two areas where people who want to help save America, people who want to do what's right, those are two really good areas for you to focus on: education and stopping the voter fraud. Because once people know what these Democrats are up to, once people realize how barbaric this stuff is, they don't stand a chance.
You had some information, and hopefully you can bring this up here in the pre-interview, about one of your sources. You don't have to disclose your sources, but the NAFTA replacement, the USMCA, it sucks. I mean, in some ways, it's like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP. I mean, it raises sovereignty. It's I don't know. What are your thoughts on this USMCA? And you had some dealings with a White House, a Trump administration official. You don't have to name him, but what he said to you was pretty eye-opening.
Yeah, and so there's an awareness even within the top levels of the Trump administration that there's some huge problems with this USMCA. One of the points that came up in conversation was the protections for sexual orientation and gender identity that the Canadians insisted on. So now we're going to have this trilateral treaty that purports to bind the United States, even though the Senate's not going to ratify it, that is going to enshrine homosexuality and gender confusion into federal law, right? That's crazy. You also have big elements of the Trans-Pacific Partnership coming in here, big elements of NAFTA coming in here. And so from an economic perspective, it may be a little better, but from the perspective that really matters, our national sovereignty, this is a disaster. I'm hoping that Trump has some sort of trick up his sleeve, because this really is a disaster. We were talking about the Council on Foreign Relations earlier. This agreement was negotiated by Robert Lighthizer, who's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, the U.S. Trade Representative. So I think every American who's concerned about our sovereignty, every American who agrees with what Trump said in Vietnam, we're not going to do any more multilateral trade deals that surrender our sovereignty. We'll do bilateral deals with individual countries so that we don't have to give up our sovereignty. You need to get involved in this, right? Call your member of Congress, explain to them what's in here, because this is a disaster from the perspective of national sovereignty. And the truth is, even people at the highest levels of the Trump administration recognize these problems. So why they're still pushing it, unfortunately, I can't give a good answer to that, but the fact is this is a dangerous agreement. It's dangerous for our sovereignty, and you know, it's as far as I'm concerned, it's not an improvement over NAFTA. It's worse than NAFTA. It covers more areas. It's got more insanity in it. And, you know, why? Why can't we just trade with Mexico and Canada like we did before NAFTA, right? We traded with them before NAFTA. Why do we need this? The reality is we don't.
And you think that some of the provisions in the USMCA just want to destroy Christianity? I mean,
No
let's get
question
real
about
here.
it. Yeah, I mean, this whole
Why do you
idea,
say that?
well, this whole idea of sexual orientation and gender identity, you know, the Democrats in Congress are passing a separate bill, or working on a separate bill called the Equality Act. It contains the exact same language, sexual orientation and gender identity. They want to make it illegal to, quote unquote, discriminate against people for their sexual identity and gender identity and sexual orientation. What this means in practice is that, and the Equality Act actually makes it crystal clear, religious freedom is not even a defense against charges under this. They want to force churches, they want to force Christian schools, they want to force everybody in America to bow down before this ideology. And actually, I talked with a network of pastors across America, and one black pastor in particular out of Washington, D.C., he says that this is going to be the Pedophile Protection Act. And let me break that down. When they talk about sexual orientation and gender identity, you know, the average person here is homosexuality and, you know, men who claim to be women or women who claim to be men and, you know, dress up in dresses or whatever, want to go in the little girl's bathroom. Now you have a concerted effort by the establishment to describe pedophilia and pederasty as a sexual orientation. You know, you've had major publications come out and say it's just a sexual orientation. You're just born that way. You know, yeah, you probably shouldn't rape children, but you know, it's just who I am. And I'm sorry, first of all, your sinful feelings, your disordered feelings, as the Catholic Church calls them, are not your identity. And second of all, to enshrine that in federal law and to say that a church school has to hire a man in a dress to teach the Sunday school program, that's crazy. And what it would do is it would declare the foundational beliefs of Christianity and also Judaism and even Islam to be contrary to federal law, to be discriminatory on their face. And when they say religious freedom is not a defense under this, you realize they are coming for the Christians. We've seen them persecute bakers. We've seen them persecute florists. This exact same language is in the USMCA. Apparently, the Canadians gave the Trump administration an assurance that we wouldn't have to change our laws to comply with that provision. But why? Why do that, right? Why give some activist judge in California the opportunity to say, hey, this USMCA agreement requires us to force churches to hire homosexual pastors, for example, right? Why would you do that?
Just to destroy Christianity.
Exactly.
They hate it. The Constitution is largely based on Christianity. It's largely based on the Bible.
It is. I mean, there's no question about it, Greg. God said, "Thou shalt not murder." So the founder said, "You have a God-given right to life." Right? The founder said, "God said, thou shalt not steal." And so the founder said, "You have a God-given right to your property, and nobody can deprive you of your property without due process of law." I mean, the whole Constitution, the whole idea of limited government and individual liberty, this was all an outgrowth of a biblical worldview that's at the foundation of Western civilization. And that is why the other side, the enemy, and again, this is a spiritual battle too, is trying so hard to destroy those foundations. And what we're going to see in the United States, if this continues, Greg, is what we've already seen in Western Europe, in Northern Europe. They're putting pastors in prison. The Swedish government in 2008 actually investigated the Bible and declared that it was a violation of their hate speech laws. This is serious stuff, right? And the United States is not that far behind these crazy European countries. If you want to know where this is all going, look at the pastors being arrested in the UK. Look at the pastors being arrested in Sweden and recognize that is our future if we don't stand up.
I'm going to leave it there, buddy. You just came on and just threw lots of fastballs right over the plate. I really appreciate it. I just want to say that you can find people can find you on the New American. You had a page there, the Alex Newman page, and a lot of good writers on the New American. Actually, USMCA, I think another writer wrote about that recently on the New American, which you should, just go to the New American in general. But you should give me your page, and I'll put that up. Also, just so people know, and I want to hit this pretty good for you because you're a good guy, and I want this to succeed in case, things at the New American don't work out. Although they're working out great right now, okay? But this is a nice a paper route for you. It's a libertysentinel.org, libertysentinel.org. You can find Alex Newman there writing almost every day. You're a prolific writer, my friend, and you got a great brain, and thanks for putting on our parade here at usawatchdog.com. Alex Newman from the New American, thanks for joining us today on usawatchdog.com.
Thank you so much for having me, Greg. Always a pleasure. God bless.